Adelaide Forrester stood frozen in the doorway of her small home, watching the dust cloud trail behind her husband's wagon as he disappeared from her life. He hadn't even looked back. 3 years of marriage had come to this, a hastily scrawled note on the kitchen table. The lockbox emptied of every cent they'd saved, and nothing but broken promises lingering in the air of Silver City, New Mexico. The year was 1883, and at 25 years old, Adelaide had just become both a widow and a pauper in the same heartless moment. Timothy Forrester hadn't died. He'd simply decided that the silver mines had dried up along with his interest in his wife, leaving before dawn with all their worldly possessions that would fit in a wagon. She closed the door against the hot summer wind that swept down Main Street, carrying with it the sounds of a bustling frontier town oblivious to her personal tragedy. The small house rented, not owned, suddenly felt like a stranger's home. She had exactly $3 hidden in the lining of her boot, a week's worth of food, and 30 days before the rent came due. Adelaide sank into a kitchen chair, her fingers tracing the grain of the wooden table where Timothy had left his goodbye. "Found a better prospect up north," he'd written. "You'd only slow me down." Just like that, the man who'd promised to cherish her until death had chosen the call of gold over the vows of marriage. "Won't give him the satisfaction," Adelaide whispered to the empty room, blinking back tears that threatened to fall. She'd cried enough when her parents died 3 years ago, leaving her with no family and pushing her into a hasty marriage with the charming mining supervisor who'd seemed like salvation at the time. Timothy Forrester had appeared the perfect gentleman, then steady employment, a kind smile, and promises of a beautiful future. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor as Adelaide took inventory of her situation. Her talents were limited to keeping house and the basic bookkeeping her father had taught her. Silver City was a town built for men miners, cowboys, and merchants. Women either had husbands or worked in the saloons, with precious little in between. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Adelaide quickly wiped her eyes, smoothed her skirts, and opened the door to find Mrs. Patterson, the butcher's wife, standing on her porch with a concerned expression. "Adelaide, dear, I saw Timothy leaving with the wagon this morning. Heading out for supplies, was he?" Adelaide forced her lips into something resembling a smile. "No, Mrs. Patterson, I'm afraid Timothy has left for good, headed north for better prospects." The older woman's face fell. "Oh, my poor child, left you behind, has he, the scoundrel?" Her eyes narrowed. "And what of your finances? Did he leave you provided for?" "Quite the opposite," Adelaide admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He took everything." Mrs. Patterson's plump hand covered her mouth in shock. "That simply won't do, absolutely won't do." She bustled past Adelaide into the house. "First things first, you'll need work. No sense in dwelling on what can't be changed." Over cups of tea that Adelaide could scarcely afford to serve, Mrs. Patterson outlined the limited options available to a woman in her position. Working at the Golden Nugget Saloon was immediately dismissed. "You're a respectable woman," Adelaide followed by suggestions of taking in laundry or perhaps offering sewing services. "There's also the Alderman Ranch," Mrs. Patterson said thoughtfully. "They've been advertising for a housekeeper since Mrs. Alderman passed last winter. The old man and his son run that place now." Her brow furrowed. "It's a fair distance out of town, mind you, but the Aldermans are good people. Wealthy, too, from what I hear." By evening, Adelaide had made her decision. She would inquire about the position at the Alderman Ranch. Working as a housekeeper might not have been what she imagined for herself, but it offered room and board and distance from the pitying glances she would surely receive in town as news of Timothy's abandonment spread. The following morning, Adelaide packed her few remaining possessions into a carpet bag. She wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton with minimal embellishments, and pulled her chestnut hair into a neat bun. First impressions would matter if she hoped to secure the position. The stagecoach dropped her at the crossroads 5 miles from the ranch. Adelaide stood in the swirling dust as the coach rumbled away, leaving her alone with her small bag and smaller hopes. The walk stretched before her, heat waves shimmering over the dirt road that wound through scrubby hills toward the distant ranch. An hour into her journey, the sound of hoofbeats approached from behind. Adelaide stepped to the side of the road, shielding her eyes against the sun to see a rider approaching. The horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, slowed as it neared, and Adelaide got her first look at the man, who would unwittingly change the course of her life. He sat tall in the saddle, shoulders broad beneath a dusty work shirt, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. When he pulled the horse to a stop beside her, Adelaide caught her breath. The man was perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and the clearest blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "you're a fair piece from town. Everything all right?" "Yes, thank you," Adelaide replied, trying to maintain her composure. "I'm headed to the Alderman Ranch. I'm inquiring about the housekeeper position." The man studied her for a moment, then glanced at her small bag. "That's another 4 miles in this heat." He swung down from the saddle with fluid grace. "I'm headed that way myself. Let me offer you a ride." "Oh, I couldn't," Adelaide began, but he was already securing her bag to his saddle. "I insist," he said simply. "Name's Blake Alderman. It's my father's ranch you're headed to." Adelaide felt her cheeks flush. "Mr. Alderman, I'm Adelaide Forrester, Mrs. Adelaide Forrester," she corrected, unsure why she felt compelled to emphasize her married status to this stranger. "Well, Mrs. Forrester," Blake said, offering his hand to help her mount. "Seems fate put me in your path today." His hand was calloused but gentle as he helped her onto the horse, then swung up behind her. Adelaide sat rigid, acutely aware of the impropriety of their position despite the practical necessity. The solid warmth of him at her back was both reassuring and unsettling. "Relax, madam," Blake said, his voice close to her ear as he urged the horse forward. "Old Thunder here has carried heavier loads than the two of us." As they rode, Blake pointed out landmarks: the creek that ran through the property, the south pasture where a herd of cattle grazed, the distant mountains that marked the boundary of Alderman land. Adelaide found herself relaxing despite her circumstances, drawn into conversation with this unexpectedly thoughtful cowboy. "So what brings you to seek work at our ranch, Mrs. Forrester, if you don't mind my asking?" Adelaide hesitated, pride warring with honesty. "My husband left yesterday," she finally said, her voice steady. "He took our savings and departed for northern mining territories. I find myself in need of employment and accommodation rather suddenly." Blake was quiet for a moment, and Adelaide appreciated his lack of immediate platitudes. "That's a hard blow," he finally said. "I'm sorry for your troubles." "Thank you," she replied simply. They crested a small rise, and the Alderman Ranch spread before them, a sprawling main house of whitewashed adobe with several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, and smoke curled from the chimney of the main house. "It's beautiful," Adelaide breathed. "It's home," Blake replied, a note of pride in his voice. "My father's father built that house. Added to it over the years, of course, but the heart of it is nearly 40 years old now." As they approached the ranch yard, an older man emerged from the barn. Tall and lean like his son, Walter Alderman had the weathered face of a man who'd spent decades under the southwestern sun. His gray hair was still thick and his posture remained unbent by age. "Blake," he called, "didn't expect you back so soon." His eyes fell on Adelaide and curiosity crossed his features. Blake dismounted and helped Adelaide down with careful hands. "Found Mrs. Forrester walking out from the crossroads, Pa. She's here about the housekeeper position." Walter Alderman approached, studying Adelaide with shrewd eyes. "Are you now? Well, you've saved me a trip into town to post another notice. Last 3 women who inquired weren't up to the task." He extended a hand. "Walter Alderman, madam, welcome to Circle A. Adelaide Forrester, sir, thank you for seeing me." Walter glanced at her small bag, then back to her face. "Not much luggage for relocating." "I travel light, Mr. Alderman." Adelaide met his gaze steadily, unwilling to share her full circumstances just yet. A hint of a smile touched the older man's face. "That's refreshing. Come inside, Mrs. Forrester. We'll discuss the particulars over some coffee." The kitchen of the Alderman home was surprisingly spacious, with a large cast iron stove, a scrubbed wooden table that could seat 8, and cupboards that spoke of prosperity without ostentation. Walter Alderman explained the duties: cooking, cleaning, laundry for himself and Blake, plus occasional meals for the ranch hands during busy seasons. "Room and board plus $20 a month," he said. "Your quarters would be the room off the kitchen. It's small but private." $20 was generous, more than Adelaide had expected. "When would you need me to start?" she asked. "Yesterday," Walter replied bluntly. "But today will do." And just like that, Adelaide had employment and a roof over her head. Blake brought in her bag while Walter showed her to the small but comfortable room that would be hers. It held a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window that looked out toward the mountains. "Get settled," Walter said. "Then come see what you can make of the kitchen. We've been bachelor cooking since my wife passed, and I suspect we've developed some bad habits." Left alone, Adelaide sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by how quickly her circumstances had changed. Yesterday, she had been a wife with a home in town. Today, she was a housekeeper on a ranch miles from Silver City, working for 2 men she'd just met. She allowed herself exactly 3 minutes to absorb the shock before rising, washing her face in the basin provided, and straightening her dress. There was work to be done, and Adelaide Forrester had never shied away from work. The kitchen, she discovered, was in desperate need of organization. While clean, it lacked the efficient arrangement that makes cooking pleasant rather than burdensome. Adelaide rolled up her sleeves and set to work, familiarizing herself with the contents of cupboards and pantry. She was midway through reorganizing the baking supplies when Blake entered, carrying a pitcher of fresh milk. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting it on the table. "We've got a good milk cow, but neither Pa nor I have much talent for turning her gifts into decent meals." Adelaide smiled despite herself. "Thank you. I was just taking inventory of what's available." "And the verdict?" Blake leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "You have excellent provisions but poor organization, and whoever last baked bread used far too much salt." A laugh escaped him, a rich sound that Adelaide found unexpectedly pleasing. "That would be me. Pa said it was like eating a salt lick, but I thought he was exaggerating." "He wasn't," Adelaide replied, finding herself smiling back. Blake pushed away from the doorframe. "I'll leave you to it then. Dinner is usually at 6, but we're flexible." "I'll have it ready at 6, Adelaide promised. By 5:30, the kitchen smelled of roasting beef, baked potatoes, and fresh bread. Adelaide had discovered a sack of apples that were still good and had fashioned a simple apple tart for dessert. Setting the table with the ranch's sturdy blue and white dishes, she felt a small surge of satisfaction. This was work she knew how to do well. Both men arrived promptly at 6, washing up at the pump outside before entering. They paused in the doorway, taking in the transformed kitchen and the steaming food laid out on the table. "Well now," Walter said quietly, "I'd forgotten what a proper meal looked like." Blake's eyes met Adelaide's across the room, appreciation evident in his gaze. "You've worked magic in a few hours, Mrs. Forrester." Adelaide felt a flush of pride. "It's nothing special, just simple food properly prepared." "After months of burned beans and tough biscuits, this is special indeed," Walter replied, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Please join us." Adelaide hesitated. "I had thought to eat in my room." "Nonsense," Walter interrupted. "My wife always ate with me, and you'll do the same. You're not a servant, Mrs. Forrester. You're our housekeeper, and on the Circle A that means you're part of the household." Touched by the unexpected courtesy, Adelaide took the seat Walter indicated. As the men helped themselves to generous portions, she observed them more carefully. Walter Alderman had the quiet dignity of a man who had built something substantial with his own hands. Blake had his father's confidence, but tempered with an openness that put Adelaide at ease. The conversation flowed surprisingly well for 3 strangers sharing their first meal. Walter asked practical questions about Adelaide's experience managing a household, while Blake inquired about her knowledge of Silver City and its surroundings. Adelaide answered honestly but carefully, offering no more information about her personal circumstances than necessary. After dinner, when the dishes were washed and put away, Adelaide sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, making a list of tasks for the following day. The kitchen door opened, and Blake entered, carrying an armload of firewood for the morning. "You should be resting," he said, stacking the wood neatly beside the stove. "First day in a new place is always taxing." "I'm fine," Adelaide assured him, "just planning tomorrow's work." Blake pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "May I speak frankly, Mrs. Forrester?" Adelaide tensed slightly but nodded. "You mentioned your husband left yesterday. I assume that's why you sought employment so quickly." His blue eyes were kind but direct. "Are you in any danger? Is he likely to return and cause trouble?" The question startled her. "No, I don't believe so." Timothy was. She searched for the right words. He was looking for adventure and fortune. I was apparently an impediment to those goals. Blake's expression darkened. "A man who abandons his wife has no honor." "Perhaps not," Adelaide agreed softly. "But he's gone now, and I must make my own way." "Well, you've made a good start of it." Blake stood. "Pa's already impressed, and he's not easily impressed. I'd say your position here is secure for as long as you want it." Adelaide smiled, grateful for the reassurance. "Thank you, Mr. Alderman." "Blake," he corrected. "Mr. Alderman is my father. Out here, formality doesn't last long." "Then thank you, Blake," Adelaide said. "And you may call me Adelaide if you wish." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good night, Adelaide. Welcome to Circle A." As the days passed, Adelaide fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent mornings cleaning and organizing the house, afternoons doing laundry or baking, and evenings preparing dinner for the Alderman men. Occasionally, when there was a cattle drive or branding to be done, she would cook for the entire crew of ranch hands, a challenge she found she enjoyed. Walter was a fair employer, neither overly demanding nor completely hands-off. He appreciated Adelaide's efforts to make the house comfortable, and didn't hesitate to express his approval when she introduced improvements. Blake, however, remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite, and often thoughtful, bringing wildflowers for the table or picking up items she needed from town without being asked. Yet he maintained a certain distance, as if conscious of some invisible boundary between them. Adelaide told herself this was proper and right. She was, after all, still a married woman, regardless of Timothy's abandonment. And Blake was her employer's son. Any warmer feelings would be inappropriate and potentially disastrous for her newfound stability. Yet she couldn't deny the quickening of her pulse when Blake appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, asking if she needed anything from town. Or the way her eyes followed him as he worked with the horses in the corral, his movements confident and graceful. 3 weeks after her arrival at Circle A, Adelaide received her first month's wages, $20 as promised, handed to her by Walter after Sunday dinner. "You've earned every penny," the older man said. "I haven't eaten so well or lived in such comfort since my Margaret was alive." Adelaide tucked the money into her apron pocket. "Thank you, Mr. Alderman. I'm glad to be useful." "More than useful," Blake interjected from his place by the fireplace. "Pa's stopped complaining about his aching back now that he's sleeping on properly made beds." Walter chuckled. "True enough. Say, Adelaide, the harvest dance is coming up in Silver City next Saturday. Would you like to attend? We usually make the trip in for social occasions." Adelaide hesitated. The thought of returning to town, of facing the gossip that surely surrounded Timothy's departure and her new position, was daunting. Yet she couldn't hide away forever. "That's very kind," she said carefully, "but I'm not sure it would be appropriate given my circumstances." Walter's eyebrows rose. "Because your husband left. All the more reason to hold your head high, in my opinion." "Pa's right," Blake said, his voice gentle. "And you'd be with us. No one would dare say anything unkind." The confidence in his voice warmed something in Adelaide's chest. "Then yes, I would like to go. Thank you." The week leading up to the dance was busy with preparations. Adelaide washed and pressed her best dress, the blue one she'd worn on her first day at Circle A. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and becoming. She fashioned a new ribbon for her hair from scraps found in the sewing basket and polished her only pair of good shoes until they gleamed. On Saturday afternoon, Blake knocked on her door as she was pinning her hair. "Adelaide, may I have a word?" "Just a moment," she called, securing the last pin before opening the door. Blake stood in the hallway, looking uncharacteristically nervous. In his hands was a flat box tied with string. "I, picked this up in town yesterday. Thought you might like it for the dance." Adelaide accepted the box with surprise. "You didn't need to get me anything." "I know," he said simply. "Open it." Inside the box, nestled in tissue paper, was a shawl of deep blue silk embroidered with silver thread. Adelaide gasped, her fingers hovering over the luxurious fabric. "Blake, it's beautiful, but I can't accept this. It's far too expensive." "It reminded me of the night sky over the ranch," he said, ignoring her protest. "And it matches your eyes." A flush crept up his neck. "I just thought, well, it gets cool in the evenings. Practical, really." The awkwardness in his usually confident manner touched Adelaide deeply. "Thank you," she said softly, draping the shawl around her shoulders. "It's perfect." The journey into Silver City was pleasant, with Walter driving the wagon while Adelaide and Blake sat in the back. As they approached the town, Adelaide felt her anxiety rising. 3 months had passed since Timothy's departure, but the wound still felt fresh. "You look beautiful," Blake said quietly, seeming to sense her unease. "Remember that." The town hall was decorated with autumn leaves and lanterns, the floor cleared for dancing. A small band played in the corner, and tables lined the walls laden with food brought by townsfolk. Adelaide recognized many faces as they entered Mrs. Patterson waved enthusiastically from across the room, and the mercantile owner nodded in greeting. "Adelaide, my word, you're a sight for sore eyes," Mrs. Patterson bustled over, enveloping her in a hug. "We've been wondering how you were faring out at Circle A." "Very well, thank you," Adelaide replied, conscious of Blake standing protectively at her side. Mrs. Patterson's eyes darted between them, curiosity evident. "And I see you've become acquainted with young Mr. Alderman. How lovely." Before Adelaide could respond, a voice called her name from across the room. "Adelaide Forrester, is that you?" She turned to see Sheriff Williams approaching, his expression serious. "Madam, I've been hoping to speak with you. Could I have a moment of your time?" Blake stepped forward. "Is there a problem, Sheriff?" "No problem, Mr. Alderman. Just some information Mrs. Forrester should be aware of." The sheriff gestured toward a quieter corner of the hall. With a reassuring nod to Blake, Adelaide followed the sheriff. "What is it, Sheriff Williams?" "Got word from up north a few weeks back," he said, lowering his voice. "Your husband was involved in a mining accident in Colorado. I'm sorry to tell you he didn't survive." Adelaide felt the room tilt slightly. "Timothy is dead." "Yes, madam." "There's some paperwork you'll need to sign, being his widow and all. And apparently he had a small claim that's now legally yours." The sheriff shook his head. "Not that it's worth much. The vein was nearly played out when the accident happened." "I see," Adelaide said, her voice distant to her own ears. "Thank you for telling me." She made her way back to Blake, who was watching her with concern. "Adelaide, what is it?" "Timothy is dead," she said quietly. "Mining accident in Colorado." Blake's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on concern. "I'm sorry, are you all right?" Adelaide considered the question honestly. She felt shocked, certainly, and a strange mix of sadness and anger, but mostly she felt free. "Yes," she finally said, "I believe I am." "Would you like to leave?" "No," she said firmly. "I would like to dance if you're willing." Blake's face broke into a warm smile. "More than willing." As he led her onto the dance floor, Adelaide became aware of curious glances from the townspeople. News of Timothy's death would spread quickly, as would speculation about her relationship with the handsome rancher. But in that moment, with Blake's hand steady at her waist and the beautiful shawl around her shoulders, Adelaide found she didn't care what anyone thought. The evening passed in a blur of dancing, conversation, and more genuine laughter than Adelaide had experienced in years. Walter danced with her once, declaring afterward that his old bones preferred sitting to spinning around the floor. Blake, however, seemed content to claim most of her dances, his blue eyes rarely leaving her face. On the wagon ride home, with Walter dozing on the driver's seat and the stars brilliant overhead, Blake spoke softly. "I'm sorry about your husband. Even though he treated you poorly, I know this must be difficult." Adelaide considered his words. "It's strange. I mourned the end of my marriage when Timothy left. His death feels distant somehow. Is that terrible of me?" "No," Blake said, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "He forfeited his claim on your heart when he abandoned you. You've already done your grieving." His fingers were warm around hers, and Adelaide made no move to pull away. "The sheriff said Timothy had a mining claim that now belongs to me. Not worth much, apparently. Will you go see about it?" "I suppose I must, eventually." Blake squeezed her hand gently. "When you're ready, I'll take you, if you want company." "Thank you," Adelaide whispered, feeling a sense of peace settle over her that had nothing to do with Timothy's passing and everything to do with the man beside her. 2 weeks later, Adelaide found herself on the stagecoach to Silverton, Colorado, with Blake sitting opposite her. Walter had insisted she take the time to settle Timothy's affairs, and Blake had volunteered to accompany her, citing the dangers of a woman traveling alone. The journey was long and dusty, but Adelaide found herself enjoying Blake's company more with each passing mile. They talked of books they'd read, shared childhood memories, and speculated about the future of the Western Territories. In the evenings at roadside inns, they would continue their conversations over simple meals, discovering a shared love of music and a similar sense of humor. By the time they reached Silverton, Adelaide felt she knew Blake Alderman better than she had ever known Timothy, despite their 3 years of marriage. And what she knew, she valued deeply his integrity, his thoughtfulness, his quiet strength. The mining office in Silverton was a cramped, paper-filled room presided over by a harried clerk who barely looked up when they entered. "Name?" he asked, dipping his pen. "Adelaide Forrester. I'm here about my late husband's claim, Timothy Forrester." That got the clerk's attention. He peered at her over his spectacles. "Forrester, the widow, are you? Been expecting you." He rummaged through a stack of documents. "Got the papers right here. Need your signature on several things." Adelaide spent the next hour signing documents, most of which she only partially understood. Blake stood quietly beside her, occasionally asking clarifying questions that the clerk answered with increasing respect. "Now then," the clerk said finally, "as to the claim itself. Your husband's stake was small but proved richer than initial assessments suggested. After the accident, the mining company offered to buy the claim outright, standard procedure." "How much?" Blake asked when Adelaide remained silent. The clerk named a figure that made Adelaide's head spin. $5,000. That can't be right." "Oh, it's right enough. The vein your husband found was narrow but exceptionally high-grade silver. He'd have made more if he'd lived to work it himself, but the company's offer is fair." Adelaide stared at the bank draft the clerk pushed across the desk. $5,000 was a fortune enough to buy land, build a home, start a business. It was security and independence all at once. "He didn't know," she said softly as they left the office. "Timothy left me thinking there was nothing of value, but he was sitting on a fortune all along." Blake guided her to a bench outside the assay office. "What will you do with it?" Adelaide looked up at him, the bank draft clutched in her hand. "I don't know. It's overwhelming." "You could go anywhere, do anything," Blake said, his voice carefully neutral. "San Francisco, Denver, even back east if you wanted." Adelaide studied his face, noting the tension around his eyes. "Is that what you think I should do? Leave Silver City?" "I think you should do whatever makes you happy," Blake replied, meeting her gaze with honest intensity. "You deserve happiness, Adelaide." In that moment, looking into Blake's clear blue eyes, Adelaide knew exactly what would make her happy. But it was too soon, too complicated. She was barely a widow, and despite the growing connection between them, Blake had never spoken of deeper feelings. "We should find a hotel," she said instead. "It's getting late." The return journey to Silver City seemed faster than the outbound trip, perhaps because Adelaide's mind was occupied with possibilities. With $5,000, she could establish herself independently, perhaps open a small shop in town, or buy a modest home. Yet when the stagecoach crested the final hill and Circle came into view, Adelaide felt a surge of emotion she hadn't anticipated. In the months she'd lived there, the ranch had become home in a way her house in town never had. The thought of leaving Walter's gruff kindness and Blake's quiet strength created an ache in her chest she couldn't ignore. Walter greeted them warmly upon their return, listening with interest as Adelaide explained about Timothy's unexpected legacy. "Well now," the older man said thoughtfully, "that changes things for you, doesn't it? I imagine you'll be wanting to set yourself up in town again." Adelaide glanced at Blake, whose expression had become unreadable. "I haven't decided yet," she said carefully, but I'd like to stay on at Circle a while I consider my options, if that's acceptable." "This is your home for as long as you want it," Walter replied, his gaze shifting between her and his son. "Isn't that right, Blake?" "Of course," Blake agreed, though something in his tone suggested constraint. Over the following weeks, Adelaide noticed a subtle change in Blake. He was still unfailingly courteous, still brought her wildflowers for the table, and offered to pick up items she needed from town. But the easy companionship they'd developed during their journey seemed diminished, as if he were deliberately maintaining distance. Adelaide tried to convince herself it was for the best. She was still adjusting to her newfound wealth and widowhood. Blake was focused on the ranch, preparing for the winter months ahead. Yet she missed their conversations, the warmth of his smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. One crisp November evening, as Adelaide hung laundry on the line behind the house, she heard the crunch of boots on gravel. Blake approached, leading a beautiful paint mare. "Got a new addition to the remuda," he said by way of greeting. "Thought you might like to meet her." Adelaide set down her basket and approached the horse, who regarded her with intelligent eyes. "She's lovely. What's her name?" "Doesn't have one yet. Thought maybe you'd like to name her." Blake patted the mare's neck. "She's gentle enough for a less experienced rider." Adelaide looked up at him in surprise. "Are you suggesting I learn to ride?" "Might be useful," Blake shrugged, though his casual tone seemed forced. "Property around here is spread out. And if you decide to stay in the area, knowing how to handle a horse would serve you well." "Would you teach me?" The question slipped out before Adelaide could consider its implications. Blake's eyes met hers, and for a moment the distance between them seemed to vanish. "I'd like that very much." The riding lessons became a daily routine. Each afternoon, when Adelaide's household duties were complete and Blake had finished his morning ranch work, they would meet at the corral. Blake proved to be a patient teacher, guiding her through the basics of saddling, mounting, and controlling the paint mare, whom Adelaide had named Liberty. Walter watched their growing companionship with knowing eyes, but said nothing, merely nodding in approval when Adelaide progressed from nervous uncertainty to comfortable confidence on horseback. By early December, Adelaide could ride well enough to accompany Blake on short excursions around the property. On one such ride, they stopped atop a low hill overlooking the ranch house and surrounding pastures. The winter sun cast long shadows across the land, and in the distance, the mountains were dusted with snow. "It's beautiful," Adelaide said, pulling Liberty to a halt beside Blake's stallion. "It is," he agreed, though when she glanced over, she found him looking not at the landscape but at her. Adelaide's heart quickened. "Blake, have you decided what you'll do?" he interrupted, his voice rougher than usual. "With your inheritance, I mean." Adelaide smoothed Liberty's mane, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking about it a great deal, and I find myself reluctant to leave Circle A." She met his gaze steadily. "I've been happier here these past months than I can remember being in years." A cautious hope flickered in Blake's eyes. "Even though you're working as a housekeeper when you could afford your own home, your own business." "It's not the work that matters," Adelaide said softly. "It's the people." Blake's hands tightened on his reins. "Adelaide, I need to speak plainly. I've been holding back because of your circumstances, because you were newly widowed and had just come into this unexpected fortune. But I can't keep silent any longer." He turned in the saddle to face her fully. "I care for you. More than I should, perhaps, given that you work for my father. But these months with you at Circle A have shown me what kind of woman you are: strong, kind, resilient. The kind of woman a man would be blessed to build a life with." Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. "Blake, let me finish," he said gently. "I know it's too soon. I know you might want to use your inheritance to start fresh somewhere else. But if there's any chance you might see a future here, a future that includes me, I needed you to know how I feel before you make your decision." The sincerity in his face, the vulnerability in his usually confident demeanor, touched Adelaide deeply. "When Timothy left," she said carefully, "he took everything I thought I needed: financial security, a home, a place in society. I felt worthless." Blake started to protest, but she held up a hand. "Please let me finish too. Coming to Circle A, I expected to find employment, nothing more. Instead, I found a home. I found purpose. And I found you." She smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "The money Timothy unwittingly left me, it's valuable, yes, but what you and your father have given me is worth far more. You restored my sense of worth when you treated me with respect. You showed me what true kindness looks like, and you've taught me that wealth isn't measured in dollars." Blake reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "Are you saying you'll stay?" "I'm saying I love you, Blake Alderman," Adelaide replied, her voice steady despite the tears now flowing freely. "And if you'll have me, I'd like to stay at Circle A, not as your housekeeper, but as your wife." The joy that blazed across Blake's face was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. "I love you too, Adelaide. Have since that first day when I found you walking in the dust toward our ranch." He dismounted quickly and helped her down from Liberty. When her feet touched the ground, Blake drew her into his arms, his expression suddenly serious. "I need you to be certain. I'm not Timothy. I don't have grand ambitions for fortune. Circle A is my life, this land, these animals, the work that comes with it all. It's not an easy life." Adelaide placed her hand against his cheek. "It's a good life, an honest one, and it's the life I want with you." When his lips met hers, Adelaide felt as though everything in her life had been leading to this moment. The heartbreak of Timothy's abandonment, the struggle that followed, her arrival at Circle, all of it had brought her here, to this man whose strength was matched only by his gentleness. They returned to the ranch hand in hand, their horses trailing behind them. Walter was sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up as they approached, taking in their clasped hands and radiant expressions. "Well," he said, setting aside his knife, "I suppose congratulations are in order." Blake laughed. "Nothing gets past you, does it, Pa?" "Not much," Walter agreed, rising to embrace Adelaide. "Welcome to the family, daughter. Officially, that is. You've been part of it in all the ways that matter for some time now." The wedding took place in the spring, when the ranch was abloom with wildflowers. Adelaide wore a new dress of ivory silk, purchased with a small portion of her inheritance. The rest she had invested in Circle A, expanding the ranch's operations and purchasing additional breeding stock that would secure its prosperity for years to come. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by the ranch hands, Mrs. Patterson and her husband, Sheriff Williams, and a few other friends from Silver City. Walter stood proudly beside his son, and when the minister pronounced Blake and Adelaide husband and wife, the old rancher's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Margaret would have loved you," he told Adelaide at the celebration afterward, referring to his late wife. "She always said Blake needed a woman with spirit to match his own." Adelaide smiled, watching as Blake conversed with their guests. "I wish I could have known her." "You would have gotten along famously," Walter assured her. "And she would have been pleased to see what you've done with the ranch house. It hasn't felt so much like a home since she passed." That evening, after the guests had departed and Walter had retired to his room, Adelaide stood on the porch with Blake, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Happy?" Blake asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," Adelaide replied, leaning into his embrace. I was thinking about the day we met, how desperate I felt walking that dusty road, how uncertain my future seemed. And now, she turned in his arms to face him. Now I know that the wealth I found here had nothing to do with money. Timothy left me penniless, thinking he was leaving me with nothing, but he actually set me free to find everything that truly matters. Blake's arms tightened around her. I thank God every day that he was fool enough to leave you. His loss, my infinite gain. Our gain, Adelaide corrected, stretching up to kiss him. Circle is our home, our future, and that's a wealth beyond anything Timothy could have imagined. As the years passed, that wealth only grew. Adelaide and Blake welcomed their first child, a son they named William Walter Alderman, the following spring. A daughter, Margaret Rose, followed 2 years later. The ranch prospered under their combined care, with Adelaide's sharp mind for business complementing Blake's skill with the land and animals. Walter lived to see his grandchildren grow into spirited youngsters who followed him around the ranch, absorbing his stories and wisdom. When he passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, he left behind a legacy of love and hard work that continued to flourish in the family he'd helped create. Adelaide occasionally thought of Timothy and the irony of his better prospect that had inadvertently led her to true happiness. She had received one letter from his mining partner after settling his affairs, explaining that Timothy had spoken of striking it rich and returning to reclaim her. Death had prevented that plan, but Adelaide knew that no amount of gold or silver would have induced her to leave the life she'd built with Blake. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Blake presented Adelaide with a small wooden box he'd carved himself. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet inlaid with turquoise stones. "I know jewelry isn't something you care much about," he said as he fastened it around her wrist, "but I wanted you to have something special to mark the occasion." Adelaide touched the bracelet with reverent fingers. "It's beautiful. Perfect. Like its owner," Blake replied, the love in his eyes as strong as it had been on their wedding day. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch swing that Blake had built when William was born. The ranch spread before them, cattle grazing in the moonlight, the bunkhouse quiet in the distance. "You ever wonder how differently things might have turned out?" Blake asked. "If Timothy hadn't left, or if you decided to use your inheritance to move away from Silver City?" Adelaide considered the question. "Sometimes, but then I look at our children, at this home we've built together at you, and I know that this was always where I was meant to be." Blake took her hand, his thumb brushing over the silver bracelet. "When I found you on that road, I thought I was just offering a ride to a woman in need. I had no idea I was meeting the woman who would change my life." "We changed each other's lives," Adelaide corrected gently. "That's what love does, I think. It transforms us, makes us more than we were alone." As the moon rose higher over Circle Ranch, Adelaide Alderman rested her head against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that the greatest wealth she possessed wasn't in the bank or the prosperous ranch surrounding them. It was in the love they'd built together, a love that had begun with a chance meeting on a dusty road, and had grown into a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. In the years that followed, that legacy only strengthened. William grew up to be as skilled with cattle as his father and grandfather before him, while Margaret showed a remarkable head for business, helping to expand the ranch's operations into new territories as the West gradually changed around them. Adelaide and Blake welcomed 2 more children, a daughter, Lucy, who inherited her mother's quiet strength, and another son, James, who combined his father's practicality with an artist's eye for beauty. The Alderman family became known throughout the territory, not only for their fine cattle and horses, but for their generosity and integrity. Adelaide never returned to Silver City to live, though she and Blake made regular trips into town for supplies and social occasions. She would sometimes pass the small house where she had lived with Timothy, feeling not regret but gratitude for the path that had led her away from it and toward the fullness of life she'd found at Circle A. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and friends who had become family, Adelaide looked at Blake, his dark hair now streaked with silver, the lines around his eyes deepened by years of sun and laughter, and felt the same rush of love that had overcome her on the hilltop where they'd first confessed their feelings. "Still happy?" Blake asked that night, echoing the question he'd asked on their wedding day. Adelaide's answer remained the same, but with the depth that only a quarter-century of shared joys and sorrows could provide. Completely. And she was. The young woman who had stood frozen in the doorway watching her husband abandon her could never have imagined the richness that awaited her, not in gold or silver, but in the immeasurable wealth of a life built on love, respect, and purpose. That was the true gift Blake Alderman had given her, not financial security or social standing, but the opportunity to discover her own strength and the joy of building something lasting together. In the end, Timothy's betrayal had been not an ending but a beginning, opening the door to a life far more precious than anything he could have offered. As night fell over Circle A Ranch, Adelaide and Blake Alderman stood together on the porch of the home they'd shared for 25 years, their hands intertwined as they gazed up at the star-filled sky, the same sky under which they'd first fallen in love, and under which their love continued to flourish, a wealth beyond measure in a life built day by day, heart by heart.